I mean, most people here know who I am. I'm Matt. I do normally teach, or I have for about 8 years taught high school and middle school. And the difference between how you talk to high school and middle school is not all that different to how you can speak to adults. You just use maybe more. No, it's about the same, honestly. It's about the same. I mean, the problems have just developed in different ways, but I think the messages I often say to middle school and high school adapt very well to adults, because it's not like you get out of middle school and high school and you just like, I never gossip anymore. I just don't do it. I don't have any temptations ever anymore now that I'm an adult. That's not true. But I will tell you just a little bit of how I preach so you can get an idea. I talk a lot, and I do need to be held accountable to time. I told my wife last night as I was preparing, she's like, "Are you done?" I said, "Probably I was done like 20 minutes ago, and I'll probably never get to the stuff I'm preparing now, but I'd like to have it." And so I'll do that. I figure out where I'm going, and I never get there, but that's okay. And so you'll have to bear with me. But another big thing is I love stories. I love to tell stories, and so I usually will interrupt the things that I'm saying to tell stories. And I'll tell you, one of my favorite stories in the Bible is actually the reason I think stories are so effective. And I'll give you the briefest recap. But because we're going to end up seeing it later as we go through 1 Samuel, but it's with King David. King David was the second king of Israel, and he had just done something that's really dumb, is he saw a lady getting out of the shower, basically, and he just fell in love with her, and she was married, though. But when you're king, you can kind of do whatever you want. And so this worked out too because nobody would find out. Her husband was fighting a war for David. The husband's name was Uriah. He was gone. He was fighting for King David. So King David said, "Bring Bathsheba to me." It's an interesting name because she was sort of taking a bath when he first saw her, and her name's Bathsheba. And so he says, "Bring Bathsheba to me," and so they do. Well, he gets her pregnant. See, that's not what you want to do. And so King David got scared because people were going to find out, and they were people who loved him. If you don't know anything about King David, know this: he was loved by all his people. And if they found out this King David, the man after God's own heart, just got somebody who wasn't his wife pregnant, now that was going to ruin him. So he did what any smart person would do. He decided he would manipulate the situation. He brought Uriah back from the front lines, and he said, "Uriah, you won the lottery, basically. I just want to reward you by giving you a break from the war. So, go be with your wife. Hang out with her." He was hoping that if Uriah was with his wife, he'd think, "That's my child." But Uriah was an honorable man, and he said, No. I will not go and rest and be with my wife when my men are out there fighting. I don't deserve this. I'll rest when they rest. And if you don't let me go back to the war, then I will stand at your door and guard it. Now, King David's like, okay. Well, that didn't work. And he did what, of course, all of us would do in that situation. He plotted a way to kill Uriah. And so, that's a joke, by the way. I don't think you would plot the murder, if you were wondering. And so he said, "Send Uriah to the front lines where the fighting is the worst." And so his commander did. Send him to the front lines, and Uriah died. And so King David said, "Oh, a widow. I'll marry her." And he marries the widow Bathsheba. Now think about this. There's a prophet out there, the prophet Nathan, and God says, by the way, you need to go to King David, the guy that just tried to lie and then ended up murdering somebody. You need to go tell him what he did was wrong. Nathan was afraid. A king that is willing to just kill anybody who stands in his way is dangerous. So the prophet Nathan used what I like to use. I just told you, he liked to use story. The thing about story is that sometimes you don't see the point until it's already been made. Which means you don't get to put up your defenses that we do. Anyone ever get defensive? And does anyone ever argue things that they realize later, like, man, I was wrong. I didn't want them to be right. Well, the prophet Nathan goes up and he says, David, I need you to help me adjudicate this situation. You see, there was this really poor guy and this really rich guy. And what happened was this poor man, all he had was a ewe lamb, just one little lamb. It was a small lamb, and he loved it. It says that this poor man loved that lamb like he would love a daughter. And it ate at his own table. It's weird, but okay. It was like a pet, like we have dogs. He loved it. And then there was a rich guy who had all kinds of cattle. He had everything he ever needed. Sorry, this is coming off. But when that rich guy was having a guest over, he looked at all he had, all of his riches, all of his cattle, and he said, yeah, but I don't want to take from what I have. So instead, he looked at that poor man. He went and he took the ewe lamb and he killed it. And he offered it as a meal to his guest. But at this point, King David is really mad. Why would this rich man do that? Why would he take from this poor man who only had one lamb? He had all of his own riches. He had everything he ever needed. He could have taken from his riches. This man needs to be punished. He needs, in fact, pay back 10 times what he took. And my favorite line in the Bible, the prophet Nathan looks at King David and says, you are that man. Now the point has been made. And King David is convicted. He rips his clothes, he falls to his knees, and he does what King Saul never did. He repented. And he turned back to God. But see, that can be the power of story. And so you'll see me up here take time to tell stories. And that's because sometimes the stories can tell you things that just the plain reading of the words don't. And so I want you to know, if I tell so many stories, just think that's what's in my head. That's why I do it. In fact, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to start with a little bit of a story here, but first I want to go over the past points that I made, because so many of you don't know where I'm at. I'm in 1 Samuel chapter 9. We're going through 1 Samuel together. It's the story of the kings of Israel. We're still on King Saul. But there was a matter of Samuel, who's the prophet and the author of these books, who prayed in this last chapter. He prayed in chapter 8. And so we talked about prayer, but we also talked about considering our own will in the matter when we make decisions. But most importantly, and this is kind of what I'm going to come off of, is to consider the stubbornness of our own hearts. And the stubbornness of our own hearts often gets in the way of us seeing what is best for us. And so what happened in 1 Samuel chapter 8 is the people of Israel called for a king. This is the first time. Before this, God was their leader. They called for a king, but the reasons they gave were because we want to be just like every other nation. And I know that we do that now, is that we look at the things around us and we want them because that's what everyone else has, that's what everyone else is doing, that's what everyone else is wearing, that's what everyone else is watching, that's what everyone else is listening to, and we want to do these things because that's what everyone else is doing. And I'm going to make some important points about that today. But sometimes in our prayers or the things that we pray for, we get what we want. And there can be a danger for when God says yes. In other words, I'm going to focus on the idea of you asked for this. And the story that I start out with is my son, he was having a serious issue. I spank his booty quite a bit for fun. Like when he's walking by, I'll just say, good game, you know. And I didn't realize that this would teach him that that was appropriate then to do on anybody, which of course it's not, right? I could good game my wife and good game my son, but he can't go and good game his teacher. That'll get you a phone call. So I had a serious conversation with him. I said, look, you can't hit booties. In fact, I don't even want you hitting your moms. I don't want you doing it. You know what you can do is you can hit mine. That's it. I'll hit yours, you hit mine. Well, now he does these absolute drive-bys, right? I'm at the grocery store, I'm looking at things, and I'm just whap, oh. And then I'll tell him, I'll say, you're asking for it. You do it again, and I don't care that we're in the grocery store. I'm going to hunt you down. I'm going to get you. Well, what does he do? He goes, oh, I'm going to get you again then, right? And then he gets embarrassed because I put him over my shoulder and I say, everybody look, boom, 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 right? And then he's like, Dad, everyone saw that. I was like, you asked for this. You asked for it. I told you what was going to happen. And then you're like, okay. Well, in 1 Samuel chapter 8, God tells Samuel specifically, you need to tell him what's going to happen if I give him a king. He's going to take your men, your brothers, and your husbands. He's going to conscript them into his army. He's going to take your ladies to work in this. He's going to take your servants. He's going to take portions of your field, portions of your stuff. And they're like, okay, we want a king. Just give us what we want. And when God says yes and you get what he told you were going to get, all he can do is look at you and say, you asked for this. In our own prayers, sometimes God gives us what we ask for, not to bless us, but to discipline us. And so it's a really important lesson because I'll tell you what, I have asked for things in prayer. The warning is if you ask for patience, God's going to give you some really annoying people that you're just going to be like, yep, I love you so much. Yeah, yes. You'll say, hey, they'll say, can I speak with you? And you're like, yeah, I got 2 minutes. And they're like, okay, let me give you 2 hours. I'm like, I got 2 minutes. And then you're like, yes, yes, yes. Well, guess what? Work on your patience. God is giving you opportunity to do it. Learn how to love people when it's difficult. Learn how to love people when it's hard. God's going to give you the things that you asked for, not always to bless you, but to discipline you or to prepare you. And we're going to see a little bit of that. So I want to read from, that's my recap. Now, Levi told me that sometimes my recap take half my sermon, so hopefully it didn't. But let's get to 1 Samuel chapter 9 if you want to read with me. I read from the NET translation. If you have a different version, then there may be some differences. But it says this, there was a Benjamite man named Kish, son of Abiel, the son of Zerah, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah of Benjamin. Kish was a prominent person, so he was a really important guy. He had a son named Saul, a handsome young man. There was no one among the Israelites more handsome than he was. He stood head and shoulders above all the people. This translation here, he stood head and shoulders above all the people, is in translation called dynamic equivalence. It's when they look at something in the Bible, it says actually that from his shoulders up, he was taller than everyone else. because that's what they used in Bible times to say head and shoulders above everybody else. For us, it would be like, man, that guy had a real long neck then. If he was just tall, like starting at the shoulders, that's when he got taller than everyone else, right? But that was the way of saying he from the shoulders up was taller. So in our translation, sometimes Bible versions will do what's called formal equivalence. That's say, we're just exactly what it says in the Hebrew, we're going to do it. But then we're like, what? That's a long neck. So a dynamic equivalence is saying, this is what it says, but this is what it means for us as readers. So if your version says something a little bit different, they're saying the same thing. They just don't want you to be confused about the length of Saul's neck. It was a normal neck length, presumably. But he was really, really tall. Now I'm going to tell you, I want you to remember this, that he was really tall, and that he was taller than everyone else. Because there's actually a really cool story, all of you heard of it, of a man named Goliath. There was only one person in all of Israel who seemed fit to the task, and it was Saul. But if you know the story, it was not he who did it. So just remember that Saul was the tall guy in the camp. Okay, it says this, the donkeys of Saul's father Kish wandered off. I do want you to notice that Saul was a prominent person. He was handsome, and that he came from a really important family, because the people of Israel said, we want a king like everyone else. So God's going to give them a king like everyone else. And a king like everyone else is frankly not the sort of king that you would want. In fact, when we discovered a really important archaeological artifact called the Rosetta Stone. Anyone ever hear of the Rosetta Stone? So the Rosetta Stone allowed us to interpret Egyptian hieroglyphics. At the time, we had no clue. It's why Mormons were able to make their own translation of Egyptian hieroglyphics in a thing called the Scroll of Abraham. Because Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, saw a merchant selling it. He said, that's a lost story of Abraham. And so he wrote it down and he made up a translation, and nobody knew because we didn't have a way of understanding it. He's like, this is what it means. And I can interpret it. Well, then later we find this Rosetta Stone. We are able to interpret Egyptian hieroglyphics and be like, that's just talking about how to bury people. It says nothing about Abraham. But it also gave us insight into how other cultures operated. Sometimes we look at the Old Testament and we see an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and we say, man, that's kind of brutal. And then you look at how kings ran their empires at that time, and it would be something like, if you make prolonged eye contact with the king, they will gouge out your eyes. Like, wow, that's extreme. And if you steal a loaf of bread, then you will be executed, you and your family. You're like, wow! So an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was a way of saying, because this is what people want to do, and frankly, we instinct this way as well, is if somebody does something to you, like for instance, when my brother, he would come and he would like hit me on the arm. Well, I'm not going to go and hit him about the same way he hit me. I'm going to hit him twice. I'm going to hit him harder. I'm going to make him regret that he ever messed with me. And we do that. We say, when someone does something wrong to you, I want to get him back more. And in the Bible saying, if they take a tooth, you don't get to take all of their molars, okay? You get just a tooth. If they take an eye, you get just an eye. In other words, the punishment must fit the crime. You cannot give somebody unequally. They have to get what they deserve. So it was a real fair way of doing these things. And so we understand that the kings around Saul's time were brutal. And the rules not at all congruent with how God wants to operate the universe with justice. That being said, they're going to get a worldly king. And the problem and the reason that they are so consistent with wanting this is because they are stubborn. We believe that we know what we need in order to be happy. We believe we know what we need in order to make our lives better. And it reminds me, actually, just in this room over here, my son and his friend Ryder were in there, and someone had given me 100% dark chocolate that I think you use for baking, right? And they said, "Ooh, can I have some of this chocolate?" I said, "You won't like it." They said, "Yes, we will." I said, "This is going to taste so gross. If I open this and you eat it, you're not going to like it." And they say, "Yeah, we will." I said, "Okay, so if what I give you, you will eat." "Yes, 100% I want it. Give it to me." So I did. And the funniest thing ever is they bite into it, and both of them, with their first bite, already go, even before the taste has hit them, they're like, and they're starting to gag, because if you've ever had 100% just chocolate that doesn't have any sugar or anything in it, it is absolutely gross. It's so bitter. And so their faces change. In other words, though, you asked for this. You told me this is what you wanted. I warned you that you wouldn't like it. Now you finished that. I only gave them a little square, just so you know, and made them finish that in order for them to realize, look, sometimes it's important to listen to those who know better than you do. We're not always good at learning from other people. I'm going to read a little bit more, and then I have another point here. So the donkeys of Saul's father Kish wandered off. So Kish said to his son Saul, "Take one of the servants with you and go and look for the donkeys." So Saul crossed through the hill country of Ephraim, passing through the land of Shalisha, but they did not find them. So they crossed through the land of Shalim, but they were not there. Then he crossed through the land of Benjamin, and still they did not find them. So here's Saul's on a wild donkey chase. He's looking for some lost donkeys for his father. By the way, this is not like a glorious task, but this is where Saul is going to be called to be king. And so God is orchestrating all of this to ensure that Saul and Samuel collide. And there's a point to be made about how sometimes we need to see that God can work in unexpected ways in our life. But I want to say something, I think adults will see it now with the rise of social media. I don't know if you know this, but prior to 2005, less than 10% of people were even on the internet. And at this point now, there is well over 90% of people who are connected to the internet, connected in a way that we've never been before. And they've done studies now with social media. So we have actually a really large group of people who experienced a lot of their life without internet. Anyone here who had a lot of their life where there was no internet? Right? I didn't have a lot of internet in my younger years. And then there was this social media boom. Everybody was connected on the internet and sharing large portions of their life. When I was growing up, we didn't even put our names in our emails because that was weird. Like, people would know who you are. So now I have emails that I wish I didn't have because they're weird names. I'll say my wife's, I won't say mine. Hers is punkychick27 at Hotmail. Had we known that these middle school emails would follow you your whole life, we probably would have done things that didn't say unicorn or super slasher. But now that people are connected, we can say, in what ways has it affected us as people? Has it improved our lives or has it not? Well, we now know that anxiety and depression, suicidal ideation and suicide have increased dramatically among young people, and it is heavily correlated with how often they're on social media. Now, why is this an important point? Because when we are focusing on the things outside and we think that we want these things, we often don't remember that the things we're seeing are not the everyday moments of people's lives. We're looking at the highlights of people's lives and then saying, that's how things should be normally in my life. You look at them and you say, wow, look at all these people with like perfect bodies. Look at all these people with perfect smiles. Look at all these people in perfect places doing perfect things with perfect people next to them. They have the best relationships. You know, they'll say, oh, you know, in their thing, oh, out with the family, we're totally in love. And then they put the phone down. And then they're maybe not even looking at each other because they're all on their phones, or they're not getting along, or things that they put on the internet. They're not like, wow, we're fighting. Let's record this. Wow, we're not getting along. Let's make sure to tell everybody how often we don't get along. You don't see that stuff. You see the best. And then look at your own life and say, well, I don't have that all the time. Of course not. Of course not. Yet you're focusing on these things and bringing them into your life and saying, I'm not like that, and I now am depressed, I'm anxious, I want what they have, and I don't have it. How do we change this? Does Israel change it? They're focused on wanting what everyone else has, and that is determining the actual programming of their brain. So I study Generation Z, but this point applies to every generation because it applies to our very brains. About the size of your pinky finger, probably a bigger finger for some of you ladies, is a part of your brain. I have it written, it's the reticular activating system. And it goes from the hindbrain to the midbrain to the forebrain. It goes all across all centers of the brain, and it primarily determines our focus. It's just a bundle of neurons in our brains. But I bring that up because when you focus on something that you choose to focus, so let's say you're going to say, I'm going to put all my focus onto these things on social media. You are actually programming your brain to then think and reflect on those things. So then it becomes the center of your focus. I'm going to tell you right now how it works. I'm going to give you something concrete because otherwise you won't understand how this works, but everyone will experience this. You don't notice, generally speaking, cars that are on the road unless you have spent time reflecting on them. I know Caden here loves to go through magazines, so if he sees a car that he really likes, he's going to see it everywhere. How many of you notice when you see the own make and model, your car that you drive? How many really notice those? Of course, because it's your car and it's become an object of your focus. How many don't notice maybe outfits generally speaking, but you'll definitely notice if it's an outfit that you own? Of course. And if I were to say, think about the color blue and then look around, then you're going to see the color blue because I'm directing that focus. And we will do that. Things we're interested in, well, we'll notice them places. My wife will ask me things like, hey, did you notice this person's outfit? And I will be like, no, because I don't care. And because I don't care, it never is the object of my focus. Well, they do this. For instance, men and women are different in how they experience relationships with their children. The focus for a mother is often the safety of their children. And they will know the name of the doctor that they see. They'll know when the appointments are. They'll know when, he is scheduled for teeth cleanings, the names of his teachers. And you might go to a dad and be like, hey, do you know these things? We're like, I don't know. But if you ask a dad, what is your child afraid of? You ask them things that a dad really says, I want to help my son be brave. I want to help my son in these things. They're going to notice the character traits of their children more than they are the appointments, because they're thinking differently about the character of their children than a mother is. They notice different things. Their focuses are different. I say this because you can change the things you focus on, but it takes habit, and you must be intentional. You will notice Christians if you're really focused on your faith. You will. You'll see people and you say, I bet they're a Christian. I see a little bit of what I focus on in my life. I see that in their lives. You'll see the things that you probably shouldn't be watching or listening to. You'll think about it. Why? Because being faithful to Jesus is part of your focus. You have to be intentional about it, and you will begin to change the things that you see in the world. Right now, you might see things differently. You might see worldly things, cultural things. You'll see things about media that maybe you don't want to see. Well, it's about changing your focus. I'll tell you something that we probably missed in the description of Saul. Oh, he's let me know. Wow, really? 11:10? Okay. It talks about Saul, his appearance, and that he comes from a prominent family. But it says nothing ever about his spirituality, because there's nothing to be said. This is a guy who doesn't have a spiritual life. Israel saw what was important to them. He's handsome. He's tall and strong. He comes from an influential warrior family. That is what is important to us, so that is all we see. We see what's important to us. He does not have what's most important to God, which is a spiritual life. I want you to see a little bit. Oh, yep. I want you to see a little bit here. So he's looking for donkeys, and he's not finding them. When they came to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant who was with him, "Come on, let's head back before my father quits worrying about the donkeys and becomes anxious about us." So he's saying, we're not finding these donkeys. We might as well leave him and go back, or else my dad's going to wonder where I'm at, and he's going to be worried. But the servants have an idea. He says, the servant said to him, "Look, there's a man of God in this town. He's highly respected. Everything that he says really happens." By the way, that is the test of a prophet, that the things they say really happen. Sometimes you'll go to churches and people will say, "I have the gift of prophecy," and they'll say to you, 60% of the time I'm correct. So that's not how prophecy works. In the Bible, if you have the gift of prophecy, everything you say comes correctly. So in this case, Samuel, everything he says comes true, and that is the test of a prophet. So it says, there's this man, he's highly respected, everything he says happens. Now let's go there. Perhaps he will tell us where we should go from here. So Saul said to his servant, "All right, we can go, but can we bring the man? What can we bring the man, since the food in our bags is used up? We have no gift to take to the man of God. What do we have?" The servant went on to answer Saul, "Look, I happen to have in my hand a quarter shekel of silver." It's not much. "I will give it to the man of God, and he will tell us where we should go." Saul and the servants are really people who've heard about men of God, but really don't know what it is to be a man of God. Their ideas of like, well, I mean, it's in fact, the word that they use is seer. It's roah. And it's the first time we see it in the Bible. and it's somebody who just knows the future. They're actually using a really worldly term to describe the prophet of God, because they're like, it'd be like somebody going in our church and saying, hey, let's go to the pastor. I heard he's a great fortune teller. No one ever says that, right? Yeah, he's a man of God. He's a fortune teller. But we got to come and tithe, or else he won't tell us. If someone who's never been to church came to you and said, hey, I want to talk to the fortune teller guy up on stage, how much money do I need to put in that bin for him to tell me? You'd be like, that's stupid. That's not how this works. Well, that demonstrates the spiritual character of Saul. He doesn't know how this works. He's not a man of God. He is not someone who thinks about these things, but it's what they asked for. It is what they asked for. And I'll just tell you this. You need to be a person of prayer. But I want to tell you one way that has served me so well. Don't pray for what you want. Pray for what God wants for you. If you begin focusing on God's will for your life and not your will for your life, it is going to begin to change how you think. I promise you. I love it when God surprises me. There is a man, I'm just going to tell it really quickly. His name was Prince Kabu. He became known as Samuel Morris. And he was a man from Africa. I'm going to be so quick, and I'm sorry. It's a great story. But I'll only say that his father was a prince. In fact, a king of a tribe in Africa. And there was a lot of tribal warfare. And one day, Prince Kabu came to his father and said, I want to be just like you because you do everything right. And his father said, honestly, I don't. If there was somebody who could bring peace to these tribes that are always fighting, that is a man worthy of being king. Well, one day, Prince Kabu's father watched as many of his people, including his son, was kidnapped by a rival tribe. And that rival tribe said, look, I'll give you back your son, I'll give you back your people if you come and pay us a worthy tribute. And Prince Kabu said, I know that my father will do this. I know that my father will get a worthy tribute and we will be free. And he told all the people there, he said, my father, don't worry, he's going to get a tribute for us. He's going to show us. And a week later, his father comes and says, I'm trying, I'll get it, I'll work on it, but I don't have enough yet. The next week, the father, same, I'm working on it, I'm trying, but I don't have enough yet. Third week, due date, father comes and says, I'm sorry. Son, I have failed you. We don't have enough. And so they tied Prince Kabu to a stake. And they were going to kill him in front of his father. And then a bright light shone. And it was blinding. And Prince Kabu, his hands were all of a sudden loosed. And he heard a voice saying, go. So he got off the stake and he ran away. And he hid in the forest. And when he came back later to his tribe, everybody was gone and his father murdered. And so he went to a nearby coffee farm and he began to work on the farm. And there was a female missionary there, and he went to the church service, and she just happened to be talking about Paul on the road to Damascus. If you don't know the story, Paul, when he was on the road, he was not a Christian. But there was a bright light that shone, and he heard a voice. And she's saying this, that Paul on the road, a bright light shone, and Paul heard a voice. And do you know whose voice that was? And Prince Kabu, he's like sweating. He's on the edge of the seat. He's like, I want to know. I know. I heard that voice. I want to know who it was. And she says, it was the voice of Jesus. And he disrupts the whole congregation. He says, Jesus, Jesus. And he walks up and he yells, he's like, Jesus, I heard that voice. And he became a believer in that church. And the one thing that he wanted was to go and learn how to become a missionary to his people, because he now found the one king who could bring peace to the tribes of Africa. So he traveled to New York, or to Philadelphia rather, and he became a student, and he was learning how to become a missionary, and everyone wanted to hear his story. He traveled all around. One day he traveled when it was very cold. He got pneumonia. He was on his deathbed. And everyone knew, because he told every church he ever went to, all he wanted to do was be a missionary to his people of Africa. And now, there in Philadelphia, he was on his deathbed. Happy. He was so happy. And the people said, how can you have joy in this moment? He said, because if I'm not going to be a missionary to Africa, that means God has better people than me. He recognized that even though it's what he wanted, what God wanted was better. You need to ask for the better things in your life. God tried to warn Israel and say, I promise you what I have is better. Here are the consequences of me giving you what you want. But they were stubborn, so stubborn. And God gave them what they wanted. In your prayer, quit it. Stop saying, God, give me this, it's what I want. Say, God, give me what you want for my life. Because if he gives you what he wants, it's always better, always better, always better. His purpose for your life will serve you always better than the purpose you have for your life. So it's good to have a prayer life. You better have a prayer life. But in that prayer life, you better be praying for what God wants and not what you want. And I'm asking you, think about that. Because if you do, and you begin to do that, it will become the habit, it will become the focus, and it will change your life as it has changed mine. So let me pray that in your life. Lord Jesus, thank you that we can be here. Thank you that you make me go long. I just pray that you would use this, God. I thank you so much that just as a minister of your word, you allow me to water the seeds that you have planted, God. And in times you have let me even see it grow. There is no greater joy than participating in your purposes. And I pray that we would be people who pray for that, people who pray for your will in our lives, God, that we can see the miracles you work in us, that you take us to better places, you walk us through hard places to give us the things that you want for us, God. It is not easy, but it is worth it, and I pray that we would see the worth of following you. Thank you for this church. Thank you for this place. Thank you for these people. And thank you again that we can gather in your name. And we love you in your precious name. Amen.